Oh my God, it's finally here. I've been here since last year, PDC 2007, waiting for you guys to show up. Where you been? It's my 9th PDC. It's a very exciting PDC. I can't believe the breadth of technology we're launching at this event. I'm really impressed by all the stuff that's happening around the company. I work on one small part of it during the day, but I get to come out every couple of years. They let me out of my cage to come talk to all you folks. It's a real honor to be able to write these programs in front of you. Chris, how many PDCs have you been to now?
This will be my 6th.
6 plus 9 is how many, Chris? I need some computation.
I think that's 15. I will be your distributed computation environment.
Absolutely, great. So, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little over an hour writing a program. We have no PowerPoints. In fact, I see a PowerPoint down here. Will you remove it from the screen? I do not want to see any PowerPoints executing during the execution of this talk. What I would like to see instead, Chris, is will you bring up Visual Studio? This is our presentation device for this talk. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write the simplest possible program we can that that shows all of the capabilities of the Azure Services Platform. We're just going to write code. We're going to write the simplest code we can get away with. Ray Ozzie made a statement which was, I could have kissed our CSA when he said this. These are nascent technologies. We are going to have a failure. Those of you, I know this is being webcast right now, people watching all over the globe. My friends in London, I hope you're having a drinking game, because I know it's later in the afternoon. You're probably at the pub already. It's actually in the evening over there. Every time we have a failure, I please drink a pint on our behalf. It is my goal to get you a little bit...
They should probably just take a sip.
No, I want them to drink a pint. It is my goal to get you a little loose in London, but not completely inebriated so you can't get home. Now, to start this off, we're going to talk about the Azure... This is about the Azure Services Platform. Here's what you should take away. If you get nothing else out of this talk, here's what I want you to think about. This platform is stitched together using web standards. Specifically, URIs, HTTP, and XML. If you know those, you have a pretty good understanding about how all this stuff works. Second, we're exposing big pieces of functionality and applications using that technology so that you can take advantage of it in your software. Third, we're giving you options. We're giving you choices as to how you can take your code and make it part of this ecosystem in terms of deployment, management, and operations. So, web standards, we're offering up functionality this way, and you get to offer yours up the same way. What we're going to do is write our first program, and what we're going to do is, how many people, just a little bit of applause, how many people were PDC 2005? You may remember from that PDC, the great Anders Heilsberg showed you something called Link, and I'm confident many of you are using that technology today. What we're going to do is start from that program we wrote at the last PDC, and we're going to make it work in this ecosystem, and it's going to be the only program we write that's using shipping technology, and we want to get off on the good foot here. We want at least one app that doesn't fail. So what we did is, if you remember that PDC, Anders and I were up here, and we wrote this link query that queried the operating system processes and the threads. And then we've displayed it in a variety of techniques, including XML, and we put it up through HTTP. So what we've done is we've adapted that program a little bit, and we're going to start there. What you see here is a service that works on today's shipping technologies, the boring stuff, the stuff we usually don't talk about for whatever reason. And what this thing does is it serves up our processes using a URI template, which puts us at the root of the namespace. We then give you the ability to look at individual processes. We elevate them to the level of resource and give them URIs. So we have a URI template that says process $ID equals some parameter. And then we also offer you the ability to delete them, because this is a RESTful process manager, and we're going to use the REST operation of delete to do a kill minus F. So here's our code. Go to the bottom. So what we've seen all here was relative URIs. So the shape of our application, the shape of our software is URI shaped. And we saw that we controlled that using the URI template attribute. Here what we're going to do is just crank up web service host, giving it the base URI because we're going to put that set of resources in some context. And it's going to be contextualized by the base URI. Now, without further ado, please hit F5. The service she runs.
First successful demo.
First successful demo. Please give it up for Chris Anderson. Now, because we're based on HTTP URIs and XML, this service is available to both people and programs, carbon-based life forms and silicon-based life forms. So why don't we go ahead and use your favorite web browser, Internet Explorer, and let's go check out our service. HTTP:// localhost whack PDC service, that was the base URI. Notice that gets us to the URI template, which is whack. Just hit F5, I don't really want to look at that code yet. And notice that in Internet Explorer, we see a nice Atom feed, so humans can see it. I can see all my processes are actually sorted by working set. That service host, if I could figure out a way to kill that, that would be bad. Scroll to the bottom, I want to see what's at the bottom.
Wow.
A lot of processes running on this box.
DevHem's at the very bottom.
Wow. Cool.
Beautiful.
We probably forgot to put the sort in there. Great. Now, let's write a program against it. Chris, please write the first line of code. So what we're going to do is we have a second VS project. We're just going to go back and forth between the service and the consumer. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the one API you need to know. If you leave this room knowing only one API, here it is. It's called webrequest.create. Webrequest.create is a very old school API. It was invented in .NET 1.0. Chris, when you were what, dev manager of the BCL or something? You were doing something. What were you doing at the time?
Dev lead, dev manager.
Yeah, so Chris was a dev on this part of the project. And what we're going to do is simply surf to that URI, localhost whack PDC service for trailing slash, please. I'm anal about these things. Please, please, thank you. Great. So we've consed up our URI, put it into a web request. We can set some headers, do some other stuff. But to get the real action happening, we're going to go call get response. And when this thing happens, we'll have gone to our service, talked to it, and brought back some data. Why don't we go ahead and single step through the client? Notice we come up in the server, step out. Notice VS comes back on the other side, and we get control back, and life is good. Voila. Now, it turns out that's not all that interesting. I want to get the process list, and I want to do, I was a Unix guy back when I was a young man. I want to implement both PS and kill. Let's do the whole thing. So what we're going to do is implement PS. So we're going to pull up the Atom feed. So we got back Atom data as XML. So we're going to use the syndication feed. Again, this is just shipping technology, really base stuff. We're going to take the XML we got from that HTTP response when we did the get response. We're going to load up our syndication feed. And now what we're going to do is we're going to write a link query against the syndication feed. So we'll have a query that says from item in feed.items. The syndication feed, which represents the single response, has a bunch of items. Each of the items has a variety of properties. One of them is the title. We're going to get the text, and then we're going to put a stircat. We'll do a new line at the end of that thing. And then our fancy display technology will be string.concat.toArray. And now, when I run this thing, I think you want to undo that. Great, lovely. Did it work? Cool. So we have our process list. Right, so we're able to get the data from the web service, display it. Now what I want to do is actually go kill a process. Chris, there's this application which some people use to present. I don't use it to present, but I know that a lot of people do. Will you go to a shell and bring up a shell? Come here, command line shell. What I'd like you to do is type notepad, vertical bar, notepad, vertical bar, notepad, vertical bar, notepad. No developer worth his salt would program in Notepad, but they might use it in a demo like this. So we now have 3 processes called Notepad. Let's go kill them. Chris, will you go back to our client? What we're going to do now is issue a second query against that same service. Actually, we've already issued the query. We've got the Atom feed. We're going to write a second link query against the in-memory cache of that result. And this time what we're going to do is look for the title of Notepad. So we're going to find all processes who purport to be Notepad. And what we're going to do is we're going to get their URI. So why don't we do select item.links.single, and we're going to pull out a specific link. Turns out in the Atom publishing protocol and in the Atom spec, there's a particular kind of link that says, here is the RESTful endpoint that I can do things like deletes and puts against. So we're going to go grab that one real quick. And then we'll just for each and print that thing out to the console because I want to see what it looks like. Love it. Go ahead and run this thing. Cool, so you can see some relative URIs at the bottom. Remember the URI attribute in the server where we had that WAC process business? There it is. Now what we're going to do is we need to make them absolute so I can issue the request back out. So we'll cons up an absolute URI by taking the base we get out of the Atom feed, which is item.base URI, combining that with the relative URI we got out of the individual item, and now we see the absolute URI.
It's a beautiful thing.
Now, the only thing left to do is go ahead and issue that out to the server. Now, because we type this HTTP web request code so often, we have one snippet that we're going to use a whole lot in this talk. We'll talk more about how we're going to deal with that in a second. So we've got we do another web request. We set the method to be delete, and we go ahead and issue the command. And now what we'll do is do another printf. Someday I will stop calling these things printf and stircat. I don't know when that day is. Cool. Notice, as soon as we hit the delete request, we send it over to the server. We see the delete process. Notice there are 4 notepads in the bottom right. There's a little 4 there. Go ahead and hit F5, Chris. No, you can see that at the bottom. 3, 2, 1, no more notepads. Great. Regional directors across the planet are now applauding. Now, what we're going to do is, that's all shipping stuff. All we did was program against a bunch of stuff we've been shipping for a while now. Now what I want to do is use the Azure Services Platform to take that code, which I love. I love that code so much. I want to take that and make that available to the world. So what I'm going to do is use the .NET Services Service Bus to extrude that functionality out into the public internet. So before we gave this talk, Chris and I acquired a developer account so that we can go write services using .NET Services. Why don't we go browse to our root in the service bus? The service bus is a feature of .NET Services. It's organized based on hierarchical URI. When we signed up for our account, we were allocated this base URI that we can do anything we want with. No going to some centralized authority. We did it once. We got this, and now we can put anything we want there. Right now, we have no services running. So you see the Atom feed for this guy is empty. You got the URI on the clipboard, so you have to type it twice?
Yes.
Cool. So what I want to do now is publish ourselves out to the service bus. So what we're going to do is in the service, we're going to add a simple configuration file. We're not going to write any code yet. We're going to add a single configuration file called app.config, which we have somewhere. There it is. And those of you who programmed a little WCF may recognize this. We've simply said, hey, that service that we were just writing, I need a new endpoint. I like the endpoints I already got. I need a new one. And that new one is going to be published off of our base URI in the cloud with the extra suffix of PDC service. Great. Go ahead and hit F5. So the service is running on my premises, on this machine right backstage, because I want to know about those processes. I don't want to know about stuff in somebody's cloud. And when I go to Internet Explorer and hit F5, the service shows up. Our registering on the service bus advertises us through standard web protocol so people can find us. Now, if I click that URI, we're issuing requests over the service bus into our code. So every time I click a link there, will you individually click one of those links, pick one at random, Explorer. Notice it's my service running on my premises being routed through this public cloud fabric that's giving me a public facade. Now, great, thank you. Let's go change our client to take advantage of that. Chris, I hope you took that URI on the clipboard for us.
I did, of course I would.
So what we're going to do is change this URI to be the different base URI, because again, base URIs are basically telling us where we live. Go ahead and rerun the client. Oh, give us some notepads, please. Yes, thank you. And notice again, our delete came over the cloud, got routed through the service bus, arrived in my service, and now my code's executing in my premises, access to my resources. It's under my control. Love it. Chris, stop the process. Please stop the service.
I'm noticing we're getting some pings on.
Please stop now. Stop now. Stop
okay,
now.
we got to stop. So apparently the Wi-Fi is working in the conference center.
Some of you know the list of processes on my machine, and that's a lovely thing. We were hoping that would happen, and that's why we leave the breakpoint on delete. But some of you may want some control over who can get to your stuff, including Chris Anderson and I. So what we're going to do now is we're going to secure that thing. So we saw that step one was extruding ourselves out to the cloud. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually put the authentication and access control logic in the cloud as well, so that my code doesn't have to do it. I'm actually offloading that work to a Microsoft data center. So what we're going to do is remove this one line of config, which we stuck in there to turn off, so we could get the instant gratification of it working.
Because it is secure by default.
It is secure by default, yes. We had to write the line to make it unauthenticated.
So should we run?
Yeah, now run the service again. Go back to the root or wherever. Great. Cool, so we're listening, and now notice when we try to get in, we're being prompted by the cloud to authenticate. So now what Chris is going to do is he's going to carefully type in his credentials. And once he does this, the cloud will well, I'll shut up so he can type.
Come on.
What happened, Chris? Did you get an error?
I got an error. It's a bunch of HTML. It's bad.
Well, go back. Yes, those of you in London are now thanking Chris for having an error. Did it work?
Yes.
Yes.
Anyway, great.
So it was a browser issue.
It was a browser,
Excellent.
yeah.
We've had that before.
Not our fault. No errors on our part.
Yes, I guess we should have used IE8.
Yes,
IE8
it would have worked great.
Yeah. Great. So we've been authenticated, and now let's go change our code to take advantage of this. So we go back to our server. What we're going to do now is we have to go do two things. So the beautiful thing about the way the web works is the authentication systems, when there are humans on the other end of the pipe, is we just ask them for the usernames and passwords, and they blindly type them in, and then we go then we go take that and do the thing we're supposed to do with it. When it's a program, we got to kind of anticipate that up front. So what we're going to do is write a couple lines of code to go authenticate so that our client can now do it as well. So the first thing we have to do is go get a logon token, go get an authentication token. So an authentication token is just a string. And we've got a little helper that just does it's a wrapper around a single HTTP web request, I promise you, that we're going to give it our request. I'm sorry, no, you're right. The username and the password. Cool. Great.
Carefully obscured password so that all the people who are immediately in your service.
Great, thank you. So when that call goes, we'll have gone to the access control.windows.net. So we're using the other part of .NET services. We're going to the access control service, getting a token, and we're going to stick that as an HTTP header here. In this case, what we'll do is we'll set the header name to be .NET services auth header name. Great. So what we need to do, last thing we need to do is say request.headers sub that header name. And the reason we're putting it in a variable is different technologies use different header names, so we're going to want to be able to go change that in a second. And we'll do it also for the delete. And now our client should be able to run. Yeah. There you go. Absolutely great. So, Chris, what did we just see? We took a service that runs on our premises that's exposed using URIs, XML, and HTTP, and we put it out so that other people can get to it using the service bus from the Azure Services Platform. We got a base URI, we stuck ourselves in there. Chris, are there other services in the world that we might want to program in a similar fashion?
You know, I think there are other services in the world that we would like to program in a similar fashion.
That was the most seamless segue we've ever done.
It was awesome. It was fabulous. So we just saw using XML, URI, and HTTP to talk to this random service that we wrote. We knew ahead of time what it was going to do. But what we want to do now is we actually want to talk to some of the live services that Dave Treadwell talked about this afternoon. So what I'd like to do is start by going to our live desktop, please. So we're going to log in to our account, and we're going to see, hopefully you picked the right credential. We're going to see it load up, and if we click the desktop button, we're going to see that we have a couple folders on the desktop. Now, everything in the live mesh is exposed as a set of resources that are all available via the standard mechanisms of using AtomPub to communicate with it. So we should be able to very easily change our application to talk to this service. So Don, if you would, let's go back to Visual Studio. And what I'd like you to do is go up to the top, and we need to change the URI to point to this new location. The root of our world in live mesh is http user-ctp.windows.net. Hopefully you're typing it right, and hopefully you're remembering correctly. v0.1, it's that nascent, it's 0.1, it's not 1.0. And what we want to do is we're going to get the list of folders.
It would have been negatives if the URI parser would have allowed them. Kidding. Kidding.
And then we're going to go, we know that the root of the URI for those folders is /mesh/mesh objects. Fabulous. Now again, Don said, you know, we're trying to bring all these technologies together, and one of the places we see these technologies have a little bit of seams is between all of the authentication mechanisms. So we're going to update our code to use the live services token and give it our live password and our live username. And we give it one more piece of information, which is the live base URI. Wonderful. That looks fabulous. And then we just update the header name. So what we've done here is we're going to use the exact same code we just wrote. We're going to run. We're just giving it a different Atom resource to go communicate with. And if we execute this, we're going to see that it goes through. It gets that authentication token. We're able to get the web response. We get the feedback. We do the query. And if we go look at the buffer, we see our folders, all available via AtomPub. So if you would, this code is not going to execute because we have no folder available. So if you would, let's create a folder. And we know that this is going to look for something called Notepad. And again, because we're using the standard verbs, the standard implementation of AtomPub, we can just go rerun that client because we know it's going to look for this information. And we're going to see that we get the list of queries, we find the URI, we go in, we issue the delete query, and this is going to disappear off of our folder. So if you would, let's go back and look. And now's the part where we get to wait for lots of internet. Oh. Wonderful.
So Chris, what you're telling me is I can program against live services without any SDK.
You can program without any SDK. This is only shipping bits. There are no new APIs to learn, not one. There's a lot of URIs to go remember. Turns out that
Which is why we're not drinking a pint.
Exactly, that's why we're not drinking. But it turns out lots of developers like dots instead of slashes. And so the Live Framework team was kind enough to give us a very nice .NET-friendly programming model on top of this exact code. So Don, if you would, let's remove all this code.
You have the ability to create and to destroy.
We will delete. We know that we're going to need that auth token. We don't want to torture you by having us watch us type it again. We're going to new up the live operating environment. This light operating environment, what did Ori use? He called it the service connector in the cloud. It was great. But what this does, it gives you a pointer into your mesh space. So we're going to connect to that auth token. We're going to give it some piece of information about how we want to authenticate, et cetera. And the nice thing about this operating environment is there's both a cloud version of it and a local version. So if we had given this a different root URI, we could actually have this talk up to my local machine. We could unplug the network and still enumerate lots of these resources. So we're going to give options, and we're going to tell it that we would like to automatically fetch all the relationships. So we now have our pointer to the cloud. It should be much easier to write this code. So we're going to do our query again. And it's going to look very similar. The live framework is all, since it's based on this resource model, effectively that URI we saw before, the slashes switch to dots. And so we go to mesh objects. We go get the list of entries, and we can go suck out the resource.title. Wow.
Yeah, it's that bad.
Oh, man, this is not boding well. Great. Resource.title. Wonderful. And then we can do the string concat trick again. And the key thing to remember about this is that these APIs are going against that same web API. So if you went down and you dug into the thing, you could actually go watch with Fiddler the net traffic going across the wire and see that it's doing exactly the same requests. So it's going to come up with that list. We're going to see it momentarily. We need the Jeopardy
ready?
theme music. I need a pint. Oh, we got it.
Right.
So,
Chris, are there other things in the live services I would want to look at?
Let's go use the dot and let's go find some stuff. So we're going to go change our query. And we're going to talk to the mesh.contacts.entries. And we're going to be able to go browse our contact list. We're going to go grab out a piece of information. And we're going to add to this another piece of information. Let's get the nicknames of everybody. Great. And let's run that. Live Mesh is up and running, querying this. And it's actually going to another one of the services that we connect to, with my contact list. You made it go away.
I hit F5 instead of Control F5. Please forgive me.
You make me sad. So great, we see a list of people in all of the contacts.
Absolutely great.
Wonderful. So what we've seen is that all of the information that we saw today, all of the stuff that we saw with Dave Treadwell, all of the live frameworks is exposed via these web standards, accessible via both simple HTTP programming as well as a great experience using .NET. But you know what I bet you we can do? This data is available in a web standard protocol, right?
Yes.
Actually late last week, we wrote a new client, which was a small little app that we wanted to write because we wanted to browse these Atom feeds and be able to issue commands that the browser didn't necessarily support. So if you would please run that up. It's in the debug Atom, there you go. And what we're just going to do is point this application at that same set of resources. So we're just going to give this our credentials. And we see if we get this, we get back that same set of XML. You can actually browse the entire namespace for my mesh using a very simple browser, and we can see the XML format here. So let's go grab that list of contacts, v0.1, v0.1 before the CID, v0.1 before the CID.
Oh, Chris? Do I need a v0.1? Is that why you kept saying that?
That is why I kept saying that. We're going to get...
Better?
There you go. And we can see, if we look through the tree, we can actually see that same list of people all available here. So...
Can I point that at our process?
Let's point that at the PDC server. So we wrote this earlier.
Well,
it is still running. I saw it running when you were tabbing wildly through Windows. Great. PDC service. No authentication. And then we'll be able to hit get. So you can see the same set of data available here. So there's a tremendous power by having a unification on these set of protocols that we can now span lots of different services. So Don, we've now seen how to take a bunch of our services and expose them this way.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we could do?
Yeah, I believe there are other things we could do, Chris. Just sit down. So, we saw a bunch of services, well, we saw a couple services we programmed against that are managed by Microsoft that are very tailored data and tailored functionality, specifically all of my live stuff, my Hotmail, my contacts, etc. Turns out there's also some generic platform technologies that are exposed as services to our applications, independent of where they run. What we're going to do now is program against one of those, and the one that we care about a lot is storage. Right? Ultimately, these computers have to put bits somewhere, and so we have a variety of ways of storing data. Now, what we're going to do is talk to a couple of different storage technologies. We're going to take some data, and we're going to put some opaque data into a blob store, which is managed at the low-level Windows Azure level. And then we're going to take that same data and shred pieces of it and stick it into the SQL services, which are part of the layers above. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of code. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to take, we're going to do photos, right? Photos have been done to death, right? I cannot see another photo shredding, blobby story kind of demo. It'll just make me ill, right? And I'm trying not to get ill in this demo. So we're going to try and take a piece of data that developers like, which are DLLs. So what we're going to do is we're going to put DLLs in the cloud. Not to run them, just to have them up there, because I like having them up there. I like to know, where are my DLLs today? I may be on my phone, I may be on my web, maybe on my PC. Where are my DLLs? I want to find them. So what we're going to do is go build that. So we're going to write another web operation. So we're going to carve off some more of our URI space. Here we're going to carve off /assembly because we're doing DLLs from .NET. And then we're going to basically coin new names as we put things in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the DLL as a opaque blob, which is the second parameter, which is the stream. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and just load it into a byte array because we're going to need to do a little bit of work on it. Now, we're going to go talk first to the Windows Azure store. We're going to talk to specifically the blob store. There are several kinds of stores that are part of Windows Azure. There's a table, there's a blob, and there are queues. We're just going to use the blobs because we only have so much time in this talk. So we are going to do, again, web request.create. Right? Actually, we need another drinking game in London. What should they drink every time we type web request.create?
Whiskey.
Whiskey. There we go. Isn't a whiskey and beer a Boilermaker? Is that what that is?
I think so.
Okay, great. Fabulous. So what we're going to do now is type in the URI to our store that's being managed by Windows Azure. So again, before we came out, we acquired an account so we could go program against the Windows Azure layer. And we were allocated an authority. And in that authority, we actually have allocated a container. And the partitioning is authority is the top level partition. Containers go below that. What we're going to do now is our container is called files. And we're going to coin the final URI by simply catting the ID that we get in as the argument. Cool. So that's the URI we're going to put our DLL at. Now, next thing Chris is going to do is he's going to issue a put HTTP request to the server. And we're going to set the content length and the content type. Content length is easy. It's just the byte array length. And we actually are going to take the content type off the request because in WCF, I can just grab the HTTP aspects of my request. And so we'll do web operation context.current.incoming request.content type. So we got all the things we need. We'll go ahead and print out our little happy, everything worked fine message. Excellent. Look at you, Mr. Completeness. Absolutely great. But Chris, there's two things I'd like to do before we're done.
I noticed two things missing.
I'd like to sign it. So we'll again go acquire a logon token as a string. We'll stick that in a well-known HTTP header. We were just wrapping it in the function here because it gets to be pretty tedious to write. We're going to give it our Azure account, our Azure account secret. We're going to tell it the name of the container and then the relative URI off of the container. Great. So the second thing we're going to do is we're then going to put the bytes in the HTTP request. So we have a little wrapper around get request stream and then stream write. And that looks like it's about right. What do you think, Chris?
I'm willing to gamble.
So we're going to run it. And now we're going to, because we exposed that thing using web standards, I can use my Atom little browser app that we built to actually go stick a DLL up there. So what Chris is going to do is he's going to put the URI ID equals foo.dll, and he's going to go ahead and get the body. We're going to go grab a DLL off the file system here. This is our local file system. By the way, we're running Windows Mojave. We couldn't get Windows 7 in time for this demo. So we take our DLL and we do an HTTP put.
I want a breakpoint.
Oh, on a breakpoint. Cool.
Okay.
Great. Step, 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 step. There's the work. What got printed?
But more importantly, we got the data.
Yes. Yes, the app is resilient. Cool.
So now that app's dead, should we use a different app to go see if it got put in the store?
Yeah, let's do that. Fortunately, we have many apps we can use. Well, we're going to use PowerShell. When you install the Windows Azure SDK, one of the pieces of technology that gets put on your disk is some PowerShell integration that lets you look at your Windows Azure blob store as a PowerShell namespace. So what we're going to do is go look at our container called files. If we do a dir, there's our foo.dll. So it did show up. Not quite sure why that client crashed. Yeah. It's the fun of life, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Great. So we've got the blob out there. What I want to do now is shred that thing so I can go find it, right? Because when I'm on my phone, looking for movie times and DLLs, I don't know. I want an index of those DLLs, right? Because Fandango does a great job telling me what movie I want to go see. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that data we just got in that blob, and we're going to extract pieces of metadata out of it and stick it into SQL services so that I can then issue queries against it later on. So what we're going to do now is two things. We're going to go ahead and load the assembly with reflection only, so we're not actually going to execute any of the code. We're just using this to read the metadata out of the DLL, and by the way, .NET 4.0 will include much better facilities for doing this, so I hear. Hopefully there's a talk at it at PDC. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to build another HTTP request. Now, the way we talk to SQL services is we cons up XML blobs, or actually XML data, that we send back and forth. Now, the XML element that we're going to produce, we're going to go ahead and we have a little wrapper around because it's some fun XML that I love writing, but most people don't. So we're going to give it a tag name of assembly. Now, the way the SQL Services store works is the basic data model is property bag. And each entity in the store has two fixed properties, a kind, which is like a nominal type, tells you what kind of thing it is, and an ID, which is used to reference it, and then any kind of any number of properties you want of arbitrary name. So what we're going to do is we've set the ID to be the ID, we've set the kind to be assembly, and now what we're going to do is we'll set the full name to be the 4-part assembly name. Remember how .NET works? Local name, public key token, locale, and version, 4-part version number.
So that was the important part to get across in that.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to put, because the web is itself a relational model. The relational model of the web is we have URLs. So what we're going to do is put the URL back to the blob so that when I'm on my phone, I can go find out where to actually go download the DLL that I'm dying to take to the movies with me. Great. So we've got the XML blob. What we're going to do now is, guess what? Get your whiskey ready. HTTP web request. So we're going to have a new metadata. We're going to have a new HTTP web request called metadata, and we're going to give it the URI for SQL services. That's the base address. That's the base URI for our authority, again, that we pre-allocated before we came out. We got a SQL services account. We have an authority called Don and Chris, and we're going to give it the container name of CLR. Cool. So we're going to do a post, and the next thing we're going to do is we're again going to authenticate. Authentication helpers dot sign request for SQL. And I bet there are 2 parameters we have to pass here, 3 actually with the request. So we're going to give it again our username and password. Love it, love it, love it. We are going to put the data into the request entity body. So we're going to give it the request. We're going to give it the MIME type, which is XSS XML. That's right, XSS XML. I was tested. Great. And now what we're going to do is issue that over to the server and see what comes back. It's hard to type on the keyboard, isn't it? It's not just me.
Great.
Great. Cool. So now we've put a record in the database, but I also, while I'm here, because I usually don't think of my world in terms of 4-part assembly names, I think of it in terms of types. What we're going to do is also shred all the types in the DLL. So can you do a for each var type in assembly.getTypes? Cool. And while I'm there, what we will do is we're going to write effectively the same code, but because we know we are a little bit short on time, some of the other speakers went a little bit long.
I just type really fast.
He types really fast, too. There's the code that does the exact same thing, basically shredding, creating an XML element that says the full name of the type, and more importantly, the assembly ID of the assembly that this type is affiliated with. So when this thing runs, when this method runs, we're going to put the DLL in the blob store as raw data so I can always retrieve it. And then we're going to take the metadata and shred it into a single entity for the assembly and then 1 entity per type, and each type entity is going to point back to the assembly. And the assembly points back to the blob. So we're stitching it together using absolute and relative URIs. Great. So let's see if we can crash this program again. Localhost PDC service assembly equals bar.dll. We'll drag the DLL out again since it crashed. Great. You have a breakpoint?
No one will believe us if there's no breakpoint.
Cool.
Okay.
Do the put. Wakes up, we grab the bytes, blah, blah, blah. We go ahead and we already skipped past the Azure stuff, so it's already in the blob store. We now authenticate against SQL Server. We stuck our metadata in there. We issue the request to SQL services. We do it again for each type. And so notice we've put all of that information out there into both stores. And so now, actually, Chris, I feel like tempting fate. Can you go back to your Atom Pub client? Yeah, that's good enough. We'll do the next one this way. What I'd like to do now is go query the SQL store. So what we're going to do is take that same base URI we saw for our SQL Services data service. That's what we wrote our code against. And what we're going to do is we're going to issue actually, why don't we just go ahead and do a get against it? When I do a get against that, I get back the data that describes my authority as XML. So I do a plain old HTTP get that's authenticated. I get back information about the authority, which is the top level organizational idea in these stores. If I go down to the specific container, wax CLR, I get metadata about the container. If I want to see the data that is in the container, I type $Q equals empty string to start. And now a query gets executed against the server, and we get back an entity set where we see, if we scroll down, we see type, 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 and then there's an assembly in there somewhere.
Yep, right there.
Y'all see that? Cool. Now, what I want to do is write an arbitrary query in here. Chris, could you do that for me? Give me a little white space here. So what we're going to do is write a link query. So we're going to say from A in assemblies, and the way we write that is by saying from A in entities, and we predicate based on the kind of entity. And then we'll say from T in entities where T kind equals type. And we're going to join together, right? Remember, this is in a relational store, so we're going to join together the assemblies and the types, and look for ones where the assembly ID is equal to the type's assembly ID property, and the type full name is equal to demo library.hdp helpers. That's that thing we've been using. Cool. And then we're going to select out the assembly. And Chris, I'm a superstitious man. Very superstitious man. What I'd love it if you could do is, sure, yeah, go ahead and copy it to the clipboard before you hit execute. Great. Yeah, I'm not that superstitious. Only because the last time I reversed the order, well, actually just do it. Just do it. Cool. So we got to see the particular assembly that contained the particular type that I cared about. Now, to get at that data, I had to give you all my username and password so you could authenticate against my SQL store. Now I could go in and provision it, right? But I don't want to go do that, right? Right now I've got to provision the way I want. So what I want to do is take that query and put it into my service so that I can actually buttress that with my own logic or my own validation or business rules. So I want you to grab that query, and let's add one last method to this service. So we're going to, again, we've already carved off some space in the URI space with our /assembly. What we're going to do is we implemented put, now we're going to implement the get. Right? So when you put to us, we take the DLL and we splay it out to these stores. When you get, we're just going to issue that query and tell you what you want to know. So here we go. We're going to write get assembly. We'll take the ID. And go ahead and, let's see, what do we need to do? We need a whiskey. Great. So we get another HTTP web request. We paste our URI in here.
That's an awesome URI, by the way.
An awesome URI. If I had not had so much whiskey before coming out, I'd ask you to go stick our parameter in there, but I think we're going to just leave it now, and we'll fake that up for now. And we'll do the get. We'll sign the request, because, again, we want to be secure here. So constants dot whatever. Request, constants dot SQL username, SQL password. Great. We signed it. This is a get, so there's no entity body, so we're just going to issue it. And now what happened was when we got that thing back, we now have that XML. So what we want to do is return it out the rear end of our method here. So what we're going to do is return new memory stream, HTTP helpers, read all bytes, get response stream. Love it. And Chris, you need to set the content type. So web operation context, .current, .outgoing, no, outgoing, please. A little late for the incoming request. But we can still catch the outgoing response. .content type equals text XML will be great. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Cool. So now, if I go to my web browser, I should be able to type, is that what you did? Good enough. Cool. Actually, Chris, I'm curious. Do me this favor. Will you change that to be, this is what I want to ask you about earlier. Could you change that to servicebus.windows.net?
Not now that we've secured it.
Oh, you can do it here. So we'll issue that request to our, that'd be Don and Chris PDC dude, stale data. Great. PDC service, assembly, question mark, ID equals B. Are you have the right credentials?
Yes.
Whoa, it worked. Wow.
So that's .NET services talking to SQL services and
Okay, cool.
Azure services.
Stop. Let's tempt fate. Now what I'd like you to do, just because I'm curious, will you, I want to put...
delete the machine? No.
No, I don't want to delete the machine. We'll do that later when we do the Azure stuff, because we'll actually delete some machines up there. Go to the end. Coin a new URI for me, if you don't mind.
Point of what?
Make it XYZ or something. And do you still have the body? Does the body still have the data on it?
Yes.
Cool. So now what I want you to do is put it. Whoa. Sweet. So that was a case, Chris. The reason I wanted to do that was we basically went through the cloud, through the service bus to get our security and routing. That happened. Then we routed to our on-premises service. Our on-premises service then talked to the Windows Azure store and the SQL Services store.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, great. Love it. Is there anything else we need to do before the next fourth segment?
Well, we've only missed one thing. We've now seen all the bits. We've used the Azure services. We've stored data up in the cloud. We've taken our on-premises server. We've exposed it out through the cloud. We've managed to do all those things. The last thing we want to do is we want to take this code that we're currently running on our local machine, and we want to publish it up to the cloud. We want to make this be part of, actually get hosted up in the Azure services, or the Windows Azure in the cloud. No, that's redundant. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project in Visual Studio. We're going to make it be a web cloud service. We're going to give it a name. We're going to give it a location. It's important in the bits that we have today to run as an administrator with UAC off because of security things. Excellent. And we're just going to give it a name. We're going to create a service here. And this, as you saw yesterday, this creates two projects. The first one being the basic definition of your configuration of your app. The second one being a bog standard ASP.NET application. And we're going to put some code in here. And we're going to basically just write standard ASP.NET. We're going to add an ID, a title, a text. We're going to have a button. We're basically just make sure that our machines are working, because otherwise we're terrified. So on click, we're going to make it be a click handler. And the thing I'd like you to do, Don, if you could you add some header text to the top and H1 up there? I want to make sure people know that we're not going to cheap out and run any pre-canned demo or anything.
Okay, great.
So put some random text up there. How about the current time?
Okay, great. 12:10.
Great. H1 12:10. Fabulous. So we've got our application. Let's go back to the code, add a quick little event handler for the clicked. Put a clicked handler, make some change, put a breakpoint, and let's hit F5. I mean, our goal here is we're going to take this service that we just wrote, that we've been playing with for a while, and we're going to expose up to the cloud. What we want to do is show the great integration we're getting for Visual Studio with the cloud services. I do love talking about this stuff. Development tools are just the best. So you put a breakpoint there, and then we're going to hit F5. And what's going to happen is, at this point, the SDK actually spins up a local development fabric that includes local storage that you can all debug on the local machine, which enables you to do build, debug in a very quick turn and not have to run up on the air. If you want to run on the airplane, you can do whatever you want.
And I have a copy of the storage services as well.
Oh, yeah, it's great. Yeah,
so anything I'm doing in Windows Azure, I can do on an airplane.
Yeah.
With no connectivity.
So let's click the button. Hits the breakpoint. Excellent. Great. So, Don, please, let's go make that service work in the cloud now. So we're going to add an existing item. We're just going to go snapshot that source code as opposed to trying to migrate the project. We're just going to grab the code and embed it in here. And what we need to do is, once Don finds the source, great. So we have to do a couple things here, one of which is we need to go to that service, please. And at the very bottom, there's a main. We're no longer going to use main since we're going to be hosted in IIS. We want to let IIS be the main of our program. We need to add a couple references. Boy, it would be great if this was in by default. So we're going to grab these two WCF DLLs, and then we're going to grab the helper libraries that we've been working with so far, which are in another directory. So basically, at this point, we have everything we need to run our service except a URI. When we're inside when we were hosted as an exe, we used the web service host to bootstrap a URI. And what we need to do is now tell IIS that we need a URI. So we're going to add a new item, and we're going to add an SVC file, which is the way that you tell IIS to, or ASP.NET to boot up a WCF service. So we're going to add that file. We're going to put a little service host in here. We're just going to point this at that type that we created earlier. And the last thing we need to do is we want to use the nice new URI template mechanism that just supports the REST model. So we're going to tell it to load up the web service host factory. Great. And then if we have 5, we should see it start. Now we're going to see two things here. Hopefully this will be the one time we expect to see an error page. F5 worked. Fabulous. That's not the error page we want to see. Refresh again. We hit a race condition where the browser came up before the dev fabric came up. So we hit a refresh and we get an error page. The reason here is in the bits you're going to get as part of
the nascent bits.
In the nascent bits that you're going to get, you are limited to running partial trust managed code. So if you would please type the
what do we do that doesn't do managed? What's not partial trust?
Well, we're listing the processes.
I can't kill processes under partial trust?
No, you cannot kill processes under partial trust. So please, assembly. Great. So that's going through our hosted service, but it's still on the dev fabric. That gets no applause for dev fabric because it's running locally. It looks indistinguishable from the local process. So now we want to do the final step and publish this up to the cloud, which then will let everybody get at this wonderful data. So we've got this. We created 2 projects here, 2 items. The first one, Don's going to navigate to the website so we can provision this. In the meantime, I'll explain these 2 files. The first piece of data is the package. It's effectively the zipped up version of your virtual root for IIS. And the second thing is the configuration file describing the model of your application to the Windows Azure so that it knows how to deploy everything, what machines you need, all those bits. Great, we're going to get authenticated. We're going to go to the portal. Our credentials. Excellent. The top one, we have a couple accounts here, one of which was our storage account for blob storage, and this one up here is our bits for running our machine. So if you would please deploy a new item. And we're going to go grab those 2 pieces of data, the virtual root, which hopefully you copied the path to, and the config file. Great, great, great.
Hold on, dude. I can't. Something up here. Whoa.
It's copy paste. That's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. Thanks, baby. There we go.
Great. So we got that. Let's grab the config file. Let's grab the service file. And we now need to give it a name. We'll call this one, let's hope this works.
No, something more optimistic.
It's going to work. Nascency. Great. So now what's happened is we've deployed these bits, and the Azure Fabric is provisioning an environment for us to run in. Now here's the part where we have 2 options as to where we go at this point. Let's start by showing them what it would have looked like really quickly. So of course we have the canned version, but we're not going to leave until we see the live one working. So we have here is one we deployed right before this session, moments before we came on stage. We can click the button. And if you would please go to our endpoint, our service endpoint. And we get the bits. And there we go. And you can actually see the version of the DLLs that we uploaded today. So the SQL data is live. So we haven't totally cheated yet. But we still have time to kill. Don and I have a day job where it turns out we're professional modelers. As part of the Oslo platform, we've been thinking a lot about how to model things, and we loved all this cloud service stuff because it turns out the cloud is full of models. We saw XML models to describe configuration. We saw XAML models to describe UI. We saw all kinds of different things. One of the great features, one of the things I love about the M language is it lets you define new textual DSLs. One of the things that we found ourselves doing today is that we kept writing the same code over and over and over again of HTTP web request. So this weekend,
drinking a lot of whiskey.
And drinking a lot of whiskey. This weekend, Don decided, much to my chagrin, that we should inject a new piece to our demo while we're waiting here. And so he wrote a new language that's this little APP language. So if you would please type on the left side, which is the instance document of our language. In the middle is the grammar defining the language. And on the far right side is actually the structured data that's being generated from it. And this is just a very simple environment that lets us play with these kinds of languages. But let's go talk to one of these services we just wrote. Actually, wait a minute. I believe it's been a minute. Could you please go to the web browser? Excellent. We've been provisioned. We've allocated store. We have storage allocated, but it's not yet running because we've just got the environment created. So you click run? Yeah, oh yeah, click run. Okay, great. Sweet. Back to our side topic. Great. So let's go and close down the two right-hand panes. We're done with that silly debugging stuff. And we're now going to talk to one of these URIs. So you need to give it credentials. We learned that earlier. So in our little language, we're going to say as user, and we're going to say Don and Chris at, this is a SQL endpoint. Is that right, Don?
Yeah.
Great. And why don't you go hit that? And we'll put a couple of these in here, and we'll do /CLR. And let's do a query of all the entities, if you would. Great. And now Control F5. So we wrote a little runtime that consumes that structured data we saw earlier and actually executes it across and lets it spit out the results. Fabulous.
Great. So we modeled that code.
We modeled the code.
We put a data model, we built a DSL on top of it, and we built a little runtime to run our little programs.
Yeah, I think that's a little easier than all of the HTTP web requests we were writing.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
Now, unfortunately, we still have like 3 minutes.
Do we really?
Yeah, so I think we may have to just finish for the first, well, you know.
I don't know. Chris, I'm not used to finishing early.
It's so bizarre. Well, great. I think
you're just not used to having...
we have time.
Yeah.
I'm used to everything running so quickly. Let's just, we'll finish, and then anybody who stays around as after we're done.
No, Chris, you gotta have a big close. Big close. Either close it now or we wait. What do you want to do?
We'll let the audience decide?
Sure. No. You are given the talk.
God.
You decide.
God. The pressure, it's unbearable. All right, we should finish. We should go. We should go all the way through. We've got to see this through to the end. We are not going to wimp out and end early.
Great.
So,
you want to go change the grammar? Want to go write a new DSL? New service out in the service bus?
No, let's actually. I know what we'll do. Why don't you go back to the service bus code? We're gonna remove the offending pieces from our service bus that made it scary to make it public on the internet. So please go remove delete from our service bus app. They should be still running in one of the windows. Delete the delete code. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this so that we can make it public, so everybody in the audience can continue to see what processes are running on our machine as long as we're executing. So we're going to go back. We no longer have anything offensive.
So we make it so they can't
post new data. Yes, that's a good call too. You guys are very wily in the audience. We've seen what you've been doing. It's terrifying. Great. So we got that deleted. So we just can still get our assembly though, right?
Well, let them do the query or not?
Yeah, let them do the query. Let them do the query.
Cool.
And great, let's add back in the removing of the thing, the binding. Oh, he's going to remember from memory. And we're just going to remove all the authentication again, so that everybody who wanted to hit our web service can do it without fear. Great, and if we run, why don't you put a breakpoint and we'll see how long it takes someone to hit the site. Put it on, great. Let's put it there, put one on there. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Somebody hit it.
Okay, excellent. It's great to have audience participation in the demo.
Hold on, I'm going to remove these breakpoints because it's,
They'll get hit a lot.
yeah.
Great.
Now I'm sure something's happened.
Oh, it's
yes!
It started. Okay.
Cool.
So first, hit the staging URL. So Windows Azure has an important thing to know about, which is they keep track of two different instances. You notice there was a staging version and there's a production version. So if you look at the top, we're hitting this wacky GUID, which is the auto-allocated staging location. So fabulous. We hit it. Did the button click work? Can we access the service? We're testing it now on our staging environment before we do anything else. Look, we have 3 minutes and 18 seconds left. We're going to still finish on time, even early. It's going to be wonderful. Great, we're going to hit our URI, we're going to get our data. It's going to show up, I'm confident. Yes. So that's our live service on the internet. And now for our last thing, please hit the switch button at the top, in the middle. Hit OK. And now in a couple seconds, anyone in the audience can hit, donandchris.cloudapp.net and can view our fabulous application, can see what time we started coding it at, and then it's now available. So let's see. Why don't you go hit the website, Don? Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Excellent.
It all worked.
It all worked. We had it. Fabulous. So we had a lot of fun. About a month ago, we started playing with these bits. People said, hey, we really want to get the kind of code-oriented tour to see the important parts of the platform. And as we started using this, we really came across these central themes. This idea that it's all based on web standards, that URI, XML, and HTTP are at the center of the Azure Services Platform, that really this is about allowing you to take advantage of some of our services that we publish on the internet and being able to leverage those in your applications. But more importantly, it's about giving you the choice and the flexibility about where you want your processes and your power to run. Do you want it to run on premises and still be able to expose it through the cloud, or do you want it to actually run hosted in some environment up on the cloud? And with that,
what should they go do, Chris?
Go get the bits and start coding. Thank you.